Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide, a reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that St. Patrick used a shamrock to explain a religious understanding of the Godhead? Learn how the shamrock became a symbol of Irish rebellion, while today, a four-leaf clover is considered a symbol of good luck. Explore why this holiday is celebrated every year by dyeing the Chicago River green, eating corned beef and cabbage, and looking for leprechauns and gold at the end of a rainbow. Become Irish for a day, and don't forget the wearing of the green, so you won't get pinched by a leprechaun.
I want you to picture the most authentic St. Patrick's Day celebration you could possibly imagine. You know exactly what it looks like, right?
Right. Oh, yeah. Tons of green clothes.
Exactly. You're wearing a bright green shamrock pinned to your jacket. Maybe you are sitting down to a massive plate of corned beef and cabbage. And outside your window, there's just this massive, noisy parade completely taking over the city streets. You're avoiding getting pinched by a leprechaun. It is like the ultimate Irish experience.
Right, the definitive Irish holiday.
But what if I told you that the origins of this massive global party have almost nothing to do with those modern festivities? Like, what if St. Patrick wasn't actually Irish and corned beef is fundamentally a Jewish dish?
I mean, it completely shatters the illusion, doesn't it?
It really does.
Because the cartoon leprechauns, the neon green rivers, the plastic hats, they're just an inescapable cultural phenomenon today. But they totally obscure the actual history.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We're looking at a fascinating collection of historical excerpts and articles detailing the faith, the folklore, and the festivals of St. Patrick.
Yeah, there's so much material here.
There really is. So we're going to unpack the surprisingly complex history behind March 17th. We want to transform this day of, wearing of the green into a really profound story of resilience, rebellion, and cultural evolution.
Because before we can understand the parades and the green rivers, we have to aggressively strip away those myths.
Right.
We need to look at the actual man at the center of this. And surprisingly, he wasn't even Irish.
Okay, let's unpack this, because right out of the gate, that is the most shocking reality we have to deal with. This 5th century Christian missionary, the patron saint of Ireland, was actually a Roman British citizen.
Exactly. And his early life was, it was incredibly far removed from the extreme poverty that we usually associate with his story.
Wealthy.
Yeah, he was born into a very comfortable, high-status family in Roman Britain. He was living a privileged life.
So you really have to imagine this teenager. He's 16 years old, totally comfortable, and then everything is just violently ripped away from him.
Yeah, it's a horrific pivot.
He is kidnapped by raiders at age 16, thrown onto a boat, taken across the sea to Ireland, and forced into brutal, backbreaking labor as an enslaved worker.
The sheer psychological trauma of that is just staggering to think about.
I can't even imagine.
You're going from the comforts of a patrician household to being a captive in a freezing foreign land. You are totally isolated.
And yet, that's where his faith really solidifies, isn't it?
It is. During this intense hardship, his Christian faith went from being just, a background detail of his upbringing to a deeply urgent lifeline. It grew immensely during his captivity.
Until he finally has this crazy turning point. He's been a captive for years, and then he hears a voice in a dream.
Right, a very specific directive.
Yeah, the voice tells him to escape to Europe. It says his ship is ready.
And he actually listens. He manages to physically escape his captors. He flees slavery, gets on a ship, and eventually makes his way to Gaul in continental Europe.
But he doesn't just go back to his wealthy family and say, oh, thank goodness that's over.
No, not at all.
He spends more than 15 years in Gaul receiving religious instruction. 15 years. That is a massive chunk of time to dedicate to studying to become an ordained priest.
It really is. And what's fascinating here is the psychological and historical significance of what he does next.
Right, because he goes back.
Yes.
Yeah.
He completely shifts his identity from an enslaved victim to a catalyst for change. He chooses to return to Ireland, to the exact same land where he was held captive.
It's unbelievable. I mean, it's literally like willingly walking back into a lion's den after you've somehow miraculously escaped it.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to put it.
What kind of conviction does that even require? To look at this society that enslaved you and say, I'm going back to establish schools and churches.
Well, it was a highly calculated mission. And he was successful because he used brilliant cultural adaptation. He knew the people because he had lived among them.
Ah, right. He knew the language and the customs.
Exactly. He subtly blended his Christian teachings with their existing Celtic worldview, so his message really took root.
And he spent the rest of his life doing this, like 40 years living in a place called Saul.
Yes, and living in absolute grinding poverty.
Right, he completely rejected that wealthy Roman-British upbringing. He lived in poverty until he died on March 17th in the year 461.
Which is, of course, why we recognize that specific date today.
Yeah, the date of his death.
But his revolutionary teachings left behind something else entirely, a botanical legacy that would eventually take on a massive life of its own.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because that botanical legacy brings us to the ultimate symbol of March 17th, which is the shamrock.
The three-leaf clover.
Exactly, just a young sprig of clover. And the legend says Patrick used this simple little plant to explain the Godhead, the Trinity, God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost.
It was a stroke of pedagogical genius, really.
Oh, totally, because trying to explain how three distinct entities can be one single form is heavy, abstract theology.
Yeah, it's a tough concept to grasp.
But it's like using the three states of water, ice, liquid, steam. It shows how something can take three totally different forms but be fundamentally the same thing.
And he just reaches down, picks a shamrock out of the dirt, and says, "Look at this leaf." Unity right in your hand.
It's brilliant. But what blows my mind is how this peaceful teaching tool morphs into a deadly political statement.
The historical pivot is jarring. If we jump forward to the 1798 Irish Rebellion, the entire context is turned upside down.
Ireland is engaged in this desperate struggle for independence against Great Britain.
Right, and in that conflict, the shamrock completely ceases to be a religious metaphor. It becomes a dangerous symbol of Irish nationalism and rebellion.
It's like wearing a houseplant as a banned revolutionary flag. Anyone, no matter how poor, could grow it. But wearing it meant you were openly declaring treason.
You literally risk death.
Just imagine risking execution just for having a specific leaf pinned to your coat.
It's a perfect example of how symbols evolve under immense pressure. A teaching tool of unity morphed into a defiant symbol of national independence.
The playfulness we associate with the shamrock today completely masks the blood and sacrifice it stood for. Oh, but real quick, before we move on, I have to throw in a fun botanical detour.
Oh, the four-leaf clover.
Yeah. Occasionally, nature just throws a genetic curveball and a fourth leaf will form. That mutation historically has nothing to do with rebellions or the Trinity. It just means exceptionally good luck.
Right, just a rare little find.
And by the way, if you actually want to grow shamrocks yourself today, they need bright, light, and moist, well-drained soil. Just a fun little tip.
Nice to know. But, back to the history. The peace in Ireland didn't last. The 1798 rebellion failed, and the Irish people faced unimaginable hardship, oppression, and eventually devastating famine.
Which leads directly to the next massive shift in our story. Because as the Irish struggled and eventually migrated to America in massive numbers, they brought their patron saint and their shamrocks with them.
Right across the ocean. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see how this immigration necessitates adaptation.
Oh, absolutely. Look at the architecture. The first major cathedral dedicated to St. Patrick was built in Dublin in 1191.
Which is still Ireland's largest church building today.
Exactly. It's ancient established power. But then look at the second major cathedral built in his name. The cornerstone for that one was laid in 1858 in New York City.
Built specifically for this huge influx of traumatized, impoverished Irish immigrants arriving in a hostile new world.
They arrived with nothing. They needed a physical anchor for their identity.
They really did. But they weren't just adapting their architecture. They were adapting their daily lives to survive in 19th century American slums.
Right. These working-class Irish immigrants were pushed into the cheapest, most crowded tenement housing.
And they were sharing that exact same physical space with Jewish communities.
Which leads to this crazy culinary mashup. Because in Ireland, the traditional meat for a feast day would have been Irish bacon, which is a specific cut of pork.
But in 19th century New York, they're poor. Traditional Irish bacon is either unavailable or just way too expensive.
So what do? They turn to their neighbors. They are frequenting these Jewish delis and kosher lunch carts in their shared neighborhoods.
And that is where they discover corned beef.
It's the ultimate immigrant life hack. Corned beef is similar to the salted Irish bacon they missed, but it was cheaper to buy from the local kosher butchers, and it was super tasty.
Born purely out of proximity and poverty, they took this Jewish corned beef, threw it in a pot with cabbage and potatoes, which were cheap staples, and unintentionally created a sensation.
A total cross-cultural fusion dish. And it got so popular that by 1862, corned beef and cabbage was actually served at President Abraham Lincoln's inauguration dinner.
From a kosher deli cart to the president's table.
It's wild, and it really makes you think. Like, the most authentic Irish meal we eat on March 17th is essentially a Jewish-Irish collaboration. So does this mean St. Patrick's Day, as we know it, is actually an American holiday rather than an Irish one?
It strongly points to yes. This distinctly American flavor wasn't just limited to the fusion food either. The way the holiday was celebrated was undergoing this massive, incredibly public transformation.
Right, because originally it was a solemn religious occasion, a quiet day to revere a man who lived in extreme poverty.
Exactly. But then the parades start.
And the first parades weren't in Dublin, they were in America. The very first one was in Boston in 1737.
Decades before the American Revolution.
And then New York City in 1762.
You have to look at why they were doing this. Early colonial America was not welcoming to the Irish. They faced intense prejudice.
So a parade is a way to physically claim space.
Precisely. It was a raw show of immigrant power and solidarity, sending a message that we are here and you can't ignore us.
But from those early defiant marches, it just snowballed. Now it's this massive spectacle. I mean, since 1962, Chicago has been dyeing their entire river neon green.
Which is quite the leap. This raises an important question about cultural commercialization.
Yeah, how does it go from a solemn day for a man in poverty to a neon green commercial festival?
It's a staggering trajectory. The primary symbols today are just cartoons of leprechauns and secular partying.
So what does this all mean? We have this incredibly beautiful, deeply human evolution. A kidnapped teenager finds faith, becomes a solemn religious figure. His symbol gets weaponized in a deadly 1798 rebellion.
And then it evolves into a 19th century immigrant survival story in the slums of New York.
And culminates with the Green River in Chicago. I really wonder how Patrick himself, a man dedicated to pure poverty and Saul, would react if he saw the Chicago River dyed neon green.
I imagine utter bewilderment at first.
Oh, for sure.
But beneath the plastic and the green beer, he might recognize the underlying human drive. The desperate need for a marginalized community to find solidarity, survive, and eventually assert their identity with joy in a new world.
It is such a staggering journey, and I want you, listening right now, to really consider your own traditions next time March 17th rolls around. When you see a cartoon leprechaun or sit down to eat corned beef, you're actually participating in a story of a kidnapped teenager, a deadly 1798 rebellion, and a 19th century Jewish deli in America.
And all of that leaves us with a final thought to mull over.
Yeah.
Since the modern St. Patrick's Day is largely an American immigrant creation built on cultural blending and survival, what other ancient cultural traditions that we fiercely protect today are actually modern mashups born out of necessity and migration?
Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring the hidden histories of everyday things. And, don't forget to wear a little bit of green so you don't get pinched. Thank you for joining us for this day in his story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in his story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.